Here's Jake Asman.
Let's get a expert opinion on the latest with Deshaun Watson and the Texans. We're now up to 16 civil lawsuits that have been filed against the Texans quarterback. Watson's attorney, Rusty Hardin, said in a statement that his law firm has strong evidence showing that at least one of the lawsuits alleging sexual assault is false. And, quote, it calls into question the legitimacy of the other cases as well. For more on the latest with Deshaun Watson, we go out to our progressive guest line right now. We bring on longtime legal analyst Amy Dash, who's kind enough with her time this morning here on the show. Amy, thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Where are we at right now with Watson and his attorney, Rusty Hardin, putting out the statement yesterday? What did you make of the comments in that statement and the approach that you believe Rusty Hardin will take to try and defend Deshaun Watson?
Well, the latest is that there are 16 lawsuits filed, and Tony Busby, who's representing the plaintiffs, is promising potentially up to 24. And so basically, Rusty Hardin has come out with a statement, and it really has shown the strategy that he's going to take. So it's going to be a multi-pronged approach. So the first thing that he did is he brought forward the marketing manager for Deshaun Watson to say that one of these women, that she had come back in January to him demanding $30,000. So first, they are alleging some sort of an extortionistic attempt here, some sort of a blackmail attempt. Two, there was a mention within the marketing manager's statement that said that the woman, when he had spoken with her, had admitted, allegedly, that Deshaun Watson and her had had a consensual relationship. So that hints at, okay, if they are able to validate that he actually was with these women for massages at such and such time on such and such place, they're going to say, for at least some of them, that this was consensual. And then the third thing is that Rusty Hardin came out and started criticizing Tony Busby, the lawyer, and saying that he's turning this into a media circus, that he's the only one representing these women, and that he's concealing their identities so that Deshaun Watson's camp can't do their due diligence and see if these people are credible. So he's going to be attacking the lawyer and, alleging that he's sort of drumming this up as a publicity stunt.
From your vantage point, your expertise, is that the right approach? Is that the approach that you think most legal people would take to try and improve Deshaun's innocence here?
Sometimes there'll be one thing, one approach. It will either be like a flat out denial, which is good. I think that's a harder approach to take, to just deny everything, because it's so one-sided. There's so many people coming forward. You have like 24 people potentially on one side versus one guy. So I think maybe he's realized that may not be convincing. So he's sort of going with this multi-pronged approach. It's really hard to tell because it depends on what type of evidence both of the camps can come at this with. Another thing that Rusty Hardin's doing is he mentioned that there are other masseuses that have had experiences with Deshaun Watson that have said that he never did anything of this nature to them. So I've talked about this before, but I could see potentially there being a lot of character witnesses for him, not just to say that some of these women may have had bad intentions or been looking for money, but also to say, I've been in similar situations with him and he's never done anything like that. So it becomes a battle of the witnesses.
I also just think that it's kind of like a weird look that, they're basically, saying, oh, well, he had all these other masseuses that could come out on his behalf. Like the whole idea of him having to use Instagram basically to try and find unlicensed masseuses. Like to me, that is just, it's a weird look. It's a weird argument. And also some of these sexual encounters, there was consent and then the rest are liars. It just feels like it's a very weird argument, weird place to be if you're Deshaun Watson trying to fight this.
It seems like an uphill battle. I think you're definitely right. Like, okay, well, we're going to try to say that he consented, and then just like you said, maybe to some and not, and then to the others, we might say that never happened, and then we're going to blame it on the lawyer, and then we're going to bring other masseuses to say that he's a great guy. You're going in so many different directions that it becomes less believable because it's like you're throwing everything up against the wall and seeing what's going to stick. So it is definitely a harder strategy. But listen, they're outnumbered, right? So this may be their only way to go, unless they try to settle these cases out and some of the people stop cooperating if it goes the criminal route. It's not in the criminal realm yet. So what he could be doing is he could be settling. But I think from his public statements, he seemed hell-bent on clearing his name, and he's proclaiming his innocence.
Amy Dash, longtime legal analyst with us here on the Jake Asman Show. Amy, do you think Deshaun's initial statement that he put out through his Twitter account where he called the initial claim from Busby baseless, do you think that was a mistake in hindsight, that he should have just said nothing until he consulted with Rusty Hardin?
I think he'd get criticized either way. I mean, he says nothing, and then the media is saying, things are so deafeningly silent from his camp. When are they going to come out and say something? So I don't think you can win, but typically in these types of cases, there's almost always, some sort of a public statement saying that this person is completely innocent and the other side's completely lying. And then as the case goes on, it's like, well, yeah, it happened, but the woman consented to it. And, so, I mean, maybe that's what he meant. Maybe he did have consensual relationships with people, and that's why he meant that it was baseless, that he would do anything that was unlawful. And maybe he feels that way.
You look at just kind of where we're at right now. As of now, there are no criminal charges that Deshaun Watson is facing, but could we get there? Like, is there a timeline for how long that could take, whether or not, we could see criminal charges be pressed against Deshaun Watson?
I think so, but it really depends on the evidence. And the timeline would probably be, I would think, weeks to months before, the police department would have time to review the affidavits and try to conduct their own investigation, do their own due diligence. Typically, you don't just see a lawyer doing the work for them and handing it over, and then all of a sudden there's a grand jury convening. It has to come from the police department's investigation over to the prosecutor's office. So if they want to take that information from Busby and use it and then build upon that, that's okay. And that's probably what's going on. And then they're going to have to decide whether these women are credible, or some of them, or all of them, or none of them.
If Deshaun Watson had settled the initial case that came to him before all this went public, would we be here right now? Would any of this have emerged? Like, could that have just basically silenced everything had he just taken care of a settlement off to the side? Like just how different would this entire storyline be had that happened?
Maybe, maybe not, because the attorney, you don't know how many people had approached the attorney at that point. Later on, he did make a call on social media for more people to come forward. And then, of course, all of the press coverage catapults it to a whole nother level where people now are aware of it. And if something did in fact happen to them, or if they have ulterior motives, they're going to come forward and contact that attorney. But it's really, it could have gone either way. You really can't tell whether if he had done this or not. What I think is interesting about that question, though, is it does show on his part that he really, potentially really felt that he didn't do anything wrong. Because think about it. If he knew that he had, had something happen with, dozens of women, why wouldn't he have settled? I mean, I'm not saying that he's guilty or he's not. I'm just saying, why wouldn't he have thought, okay, this person's coming forward? So you'd have to be pretty dumb.
Right.
If you know that you've engaged with dozens of people and one of them comes forward, wouldn't you worry that more people would come forward? At least one other person or two other people would come forward. So in that respect, it shows that he was pretty steadfast in saying, I'm not going to give into this because I feel that this is an attempt to take advantage of me. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Maybe, it did happen, but he felt like he didn't want to pay the person and he could get away with it. Who knows? But it's just bizarre. There's so many bizarre facets of this.
Amy Dash with us here, longtime legal analyst. You can follow her on Twitter at Amy Dash TV. She's doing a great job covering this case with Deshaun Watson and the now 16 civil suits that have been filed against him. As far as a timeline for everything, Amy, I know it's tough with all this, with cases by the day continuing to be filed against Deshaun, but, how long could this process take to actually litigate? I mean, are we looking at something that could take, years to actually finalize here? What's the timeline going forward?
Oh, yeah, it could take years because, Antonio Brown had that civil suit and that's still going on. And especially if it goes the criminal route, then it could really take much more than a year, I would think, before it were to go to trial, or unless there was some sort of a plea deal. But it could take months or it could take weeks if it's settled out. It really all just depends on how long it takes to complete an investigation, if in fact the police department is doing one. And on the NFL side, I would think it would take a couple of months for them to conduct their investigation, especially with this number of people.
We've had a couple of lawyers come on our show over the last couple of days and share various opinions on this next question. Some have argued that the strategy for Rusty Hardin would be to maybe consolidate these cases down to one to make it easier to kind of deal with the litigation process. And then some have argued that the strategy should actually be to try and pick apart each case. Do you think there's a right answer to that question? What should be the approach for Deshaun Watson's lawyer, Rusty Hardin, here?
It depends. Does he want a settlement? If he wants a settlement, then it's much easier to consolidate all those cases. I mean, typically, if you're going to go the criminal route, they would apply to consolidate the cases in the criminal realm. And the reason for that would be because then they can bring all of these various women on the stand in one trial before one jury, and that's way more convincing than having one case where it's a he said, she said against each individual person. But I think his strategy is an effective one, from the beginning, the Tony Busby's, in bringing all of these cases separately. Listen, you have to go through the procedure of consolidating cases if that's in fact what you want to do. And obviously it's easier for the attorneys if they only have to go to court for one case versus 20 cases. So, I mean, typically, just to not clog the court system, they would be consolidated if they have a similar pattern and fact basis. And also the time frame. It all happened within a specific time frame.
If Deshaun Watson were to settle, could he essentially come out and say, look, I didn't do this, but I'm just settling so I could go and, move forward with my football career essentially and not have to deal with all these cases? Like, could that be the argument, or would he not be allowed to say that if he reaches a settlement with all these women?
Yeah, he could do that. He could say that. And then, either way, the court of public opinion is always going to be split. So what does he have to lose? It's already split. So he could do that. That may not stop a criminal prosecution from coming forward, because they're two totally separate things. One is brought by a private attorney on the civil side, and then the criminal prosecution would be brought by the state. So if the state's able to compile evidence separate and apart from these witnesses cooperating, then they would continue on with that case.
Amy Dash with us here. So just looking at, once again, a timeline for all of this. I mean, there's some talk about the NFL possibly having to place Deshaun Watson on the commissioner's exempt list. Is that a possibility in your mind, Amy? Could you see the NFL basically, putting Watson on paid leave until there's some sort of resolution here?
I would be shocked if they didn't. I'm wondering what's taking them so long because of the sheer volume of allegations here. You would think that they would put him on. Now, putting him on doesn't mean he's guilty. The team would probably still have to pay him until there's some sort of a resolution. But I'm shocked that they wouldn't put him on until they're able to investigate.
Amy Dash has been our guest. You can follow her on Twitter at Amy Dash TV, longtime legal analyst, doing an excellent job covering these allegations against Deshaun Watson and the 16 civil cases and counting that have been filed against the Texans quarterback. Amy, thanks so much for a couple minutes of your time and following your work for a long time, covering all legal stuff in sports. And we really appreciate you hopping on.
Oh, I so appreciate that. Thank you. You do such a great job. I appreciate it.
Amy Dash with us on our progressive guest line. Great insight from her, because there's just so many different layers to this case, and we'll do our best every day to try and bring on different legal people, different insiders covering this case that is not going anywhere. As if you're just tuning in this morning, we're up to 16 civil cases that have been filed against Texas quarterback Deshaun Watson. We'll take a quick break and continue. It is the Jake Asman Show. We'll wrap up hour 2 of 2 here on a Wednesday morning on Sports Map Radio.
Wake up!